I understand the importance of getting buy-in and taking people on a journey. But what I would also challenge is the idea that following best practice is the way to outperform your industry. As far as I'm concerned, best practice is going like, you know what, there's best practice. It's a fast track to mediocrity.
Welcome to Talk Time with MaxContact, your go-to podcast for everything contact center related. Join us as we dive into the incredible world of contact centers and explore the latest trends, innovative strategies, and cutting-edge technologies that are reshaping customer interactions. In each episode, we're joined by industry experts to share their practical insights and advice to elevate your contact center performance. Whether you're looking to enhance operational efficiency, improve team management, or understand the impact of AI in contact centers, you're in the right place.
Welcome back to another episode of Talk Time with MaxContact. I'm your host, Sean McIvor. Today, we're thrilled to welcome back a familiar voice to our podcast, Adrian Swinscoe. For those who might have missed out on our previous conversation, Adrian is the author of Punk CX and Punk XL, runs a popular CX blog and podcast, and is an independent customer experience advisor, speaker, and workshop leader. Since our last call, the customer experience landscape has continued to evolve rapidly. Today, we're going to explore how Adrian's Punk CX philosophy is adapting to these industry changes, and we're going to discuss the shifting dynamics of contact centers, customer experience in light of recent developments. First things first, welcome back, Adrian. What a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Honestly, it's a delight to have you here to speak again. Before we started, I don't mind sharing, I was saying the last time we spoke, you were talking about that punk philosophy, and it was really impactful, that whole idea of actually challenging the status quo and really disrupting the landscape and actually really looking at it through a very different critical eye. I'm actually going to use that as my jumping off point. You often talk about the Punk CX philosophy in your work. And for our listeners who might be new to this concept, or for those who may have missed our previous conversation, I will take a quick sidebar to say, go and listen to it. It's great. Can you give us a quick overview of what Punk CX is all about and why you believe it's important for business?
So I've been involved in this sort of whole service and experience space for 15, 16, 17 years now, something like that. And I've seen a bunch of different kind of like things kind of change. And I've seen lots of investment and excitement and enthusiasm in that whole sort of like space. But yet I've always been frustrated about the pace of change in terms of improved outcomes we've been able to deliver. And the genesis of the Punk CX books was that frustration. I got frustrated with it and I just blurted out over too many pints of Guinness with a friend of mine, Oisin, in a pub in Brighton where we used to live. And I was blurted out, I wish somebody would do something a bit more punk to try and move the needle. That sort of idea struck with me and it made me think about where punk had come from, because I'm a fan of punk music. And if you think about music and musical history, punk exploded out the back of progressive rock in the 1970s. Now, progressive rock was this generally quite popular, but also widely known for it being elaborate, long, complicated, more interested in its own virtuosity than anything else. How many synthesizers can you simultaneously play, or how many notes can you play on your guitar solos? And it felt quite dense and hard and complicated to do. And it almost felt like you had to have almost a PhD in music or something like that, or some sort of like genius level qualification in order to enter the fray. And punk exploded out the back of it with its completely DIY ethic. And it said, look, no, actually, you don't need all these different things. It doesn't need to be that complicated. You can just do something different. You can pick up a pair of drumsticks and a guitar and a mic, whatever, and you can start a band. And it might not work. And it was short and it was punchy and it was to the point. And some people didn't like it. And that's fine. But what it did do is it caused a shift. It made people think about things in different ways. And it laid the foundations for many other kind of like things to happen, many other musical genres to happen, because it actually fused lots of different influences and was very open, it was very inclusive, like democratic, all these different sort of things. And I thought there's similarities between what happened there and also this whole CX space. And it struck me that CX was becoming almost like overly codified, benchmarked, frameworked, all these different sort of things. We're almost getting to the point where we're almost so interested in ourselves and our own little cottage industry that we lost sight of kind of what we're trying to do, which is improve outcomes for both our customers, employees, and our business. That whole back to basics sort of thing. So it made me think, well, what would a punk version of CX look like? And all a punk version of CX is about is basically being focused on what can I do differently? What can I do better? How can I make things more impactful, as it were? So it's not a framework. It's more of a mindset than anything else. And I think the first part of the book, the first track in the book, the Punk CX book, is there's a little kind of chapter in it that the title, I think, explains everything. It says, are you an artist or are you just coloring in? We get too many of these kind of like people that are in CX transformation kind of programs, and everybody's following the same sort of approach. They're following the same sort of approach and expecting to create magic or art, but all they're doing is coloring in. So you might get a nice picture, but it's not differentiated. It doesn't stand out. It's not art. It's not engaging. People don't go, oh, wow, that's different. That's great. And I think what I'm trying to do is to challenge people to go, actually, you know what? Just following a process and being better at a process or following a roadmap just makes you good at being good at following a process or following a roadmap. And actually, what I'm challenging people to say is that the right way to do it to achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve? Is there a different way that you can do it? Do you have to do all these different sort of things? Or can you do just two things? Or how can you skip around and be willing to break the rules, challenge conventions, explore assumptions, and do things differently? Because ultimately, yes, we want to deliver better for our customers, but we also want to deliver better for the business, because the business knows and brands know that delivering a standout experience is a competitive differentiator in the market. And that's what we need to keep our focus on. And if we do that, then that becomes attractive to our customers. And so it attracts both to our existing customers and potentially new customers. And so this is the thing, is if you do the same thing as everybody else and expect different results, madness somewhat, or maybe just blandness. And so that's what I think about the punk thing. So the punk is not about a framework. It's not a method. It's an attitude. It's a mindset. It's exactly what as punk was. Punk's not about having green hair and safety pins in your ears and wearing ripped up jeans and all these different things. Now, look at some of the early bands that had some of the great kind of hits. They were dressed like somebody out of CNA, if you remember the stores back in the day. They looked like your kind of uncle, but they were just playing kind of the music. It wasn't about the look. It was about the attitude. For me, that's a long refresher on the whole sort of thing. My challenge is that to people is, don't be a drone. Don't be somebody who is just going to follow a process. Actually focus on the problem and think about how you address the problem, and think about what you can do that is creative, that is different, that is impactful, that can help address that kind of problem.
Let's continue on with that analogy. So in an industry full of Pink Floyds, you've come along and said, okay, what about the Ramones? On the back of that, does that then mean that when we talk about, well, and I mean we as an industry, when we talk about, for example, so-called best practices, are there really practices that are best to apply in all circumstances? Or actually is it incumbent on each individual company to discover what works best for them, which involves experimentation? And just as a tangent to that, if there is one best practice that you just seethe whenever you see, and if you could erase, you would absolutely do, which one would it be and why?
This is about slaying almost like sacred cows or destroying kind of urban myths, dispelling urban myths or something like that, right? Here's an example. There is this industry understanding or best practice or way of doing things that, we tell ourselves that we have to be everywhere that our customers are. We saw how that manifests itself is that we end up adding all these new channels over which that we serve our customers. But here's the thing. We add those channels, but yet what we don't necessarily do is add the commensurately more investment or people and the resources to manage those channels. So what we end up doing is we end up with channel proliferation, but we end up with decreasing amounts of resource or investment per channel on a per channel kind of basis. You can simple average out now. But yet the expectations for delivering better service is still up there, even though. So we're asking people to achieve more with less across a wider playing field, not giving yourself a good chance of winning. So that's one thing. And let me illustrate why I think that can be a bit of a fool's errand. So we know intuitively that as individuals, as human beings, as customers, we will travel or expend effort for better service or better experience. So if I said to you, there's two restaurants. From where you are now, there's one that's one street over and it's okay. And then there's another one that's two streets over and it's great. Now, here's the thing. Would you be willing to expend a little bit of extra effort to go to the restaurant that is 2 streets over because it's great rather than settling for average. If you can get in, if you can get a reservation, it's easy to rock up and get what you need. 100% you do that. So here's the thing. So we know that we will do that in the physical domain. Why don't we apply that same sort of rationale and thinking in the digital domain?
How do you go about even beginning to think about what that looks like then? So if I'm in that space, how do I go about actually beginning to think about what that looks like in practicality? Because I understand in principle, but how do we translate principle into the practicality of the thing?
There's a number of things you need to do. But first of all, you need to almost decide, we're going to decide to rationalize the number of channels that we serve our customers over. So that's the first thing you do. You need to get into that, which means that you end up having to stop doing things. Many organizations don't do that. It's easy to add things, but harder to take things away. So the first thing we have to do is we have to decide we're going to stop doing things. Then you start thinking about, okay, where are we going to focus? And then you pick, rather than having, say, 7 or 8, you go, we're going to focus on 3. And if you cut off 4 and you go, here's kind of the 3, because these are the 3 that we think are the best fit for us and our clients. They match our sort of skill sets and they match our customer kind of needs. And then you do all that kind of like process. And when you're doing that process, you communicate like a communication ninja or a Zen master sort of thing. You like going, here's the deal, people. If you want great service, we're over here. We're not there. We're over here. And you keep telling them, we're not there. We're over here. And you tell that story. And people say that they do this, that they communicate, but they forget some of that sort of like stuff. They do the rationalization, they have the facilities, all these sorts of stuff, but they don't do the communication bit. Here's an example from recent years in the pandemic. It's a slightly different thing, but still an example. Many of the banks in the whole COVID sort of time, some of them struggled. Some of them got caught out. Banks and building societies got caught out because of people wanted to take a pause on paying their mortgages. Many of them got caught out and they were like rushing out to try and get something spun up, a form so they can match to their CRM and the payment system, so there was no kind of thing. So some of them got caught out. Some of them were right on it. And they put it right front and center on the website. And they go, boom, are you here? Do you have a mortgage? Would you like to apply for a pause on your mortgage payments? Click this button, fill out the form. We'll take care of it. And there was other ones that didn't communicate it as well as that, even though they had that facility. And they were like getting inundated with calls. And we're like, but you can do that. It's like going, the customers were going, yeah, we didn't know that. So you can't just tell people once and expect their expectations to be set, or tell people once and expect that everybody's paying attention to you or hanging on your every word. You're like, no. You're like going, you're not that important in the scheme of things. So you've got to keep showing up and keep telling the thing. So, by the way, we're not over there. We're over here. We're over here because we chose to not spread our resources too thin so you get average. We're going over here. We're going to be focused on trying to be great in a few things. If you want great, we're over here. Will they travel? 100% they will. Will they grumble a little bit in the first instance? Yeah, probably. Tell you what, get over it. Focus on the work because the work will speak for itself. If you deliver great, they will travel.
Hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. If you're finding it valuable, we've got something special for you. Check out our latest industry report, a free resource filled with data-driven insights directly from the contact center landscape, created for contact center leaders looking to stay ahead of the curve. Find out more information via the link in this episode's resources.
Before I continue on down this path of conversation, there's one thing that I do want to point out, and I think it's a really important point, so forgive me for cycling back just for a moment. And that's that I think there's a really important distinction between what you've just described and this digital deflection that we have seen an explosion of within the industry over the last 5 to 10 years. It's two very different things, and I don't want listeners to be conflating those two things. Forgive me if you do see them as being the same, but that's how they are very distinct and different.
You're absolutely right. When you get past the headlines or the principle, there's some complications that you have to do and think about, can something be automated? Can it be enabled by self-service functionality versus what's an escalation channel or a live interaction sort of channel? So I'm not saying that you just throw things out. Self-service as a way of deflecting away from live kind of channels, I think it's not being done particularly well. It needs to be, that's one of the things, you need to get better at that. But it shouldn't stop you at the same time rationalizing your live interaction channels. Now, you want to make sure that you're not going too far. A bit like, say, Alaska Airlines, which said, I don't know if you remember that story, that was from, I think it was from last year, where they were like, we're going to get rid of our call center. We're going to completely phone free. And they were like, oh, okay. And then earlier this year, they cycled back and went, actually, phones kind of important sometimes, useful, because there's like a use case. Imagine you're in an airport and you're rushing between terminals or gates or whatever, and you just try and speak to somebody to reorganize or change something. They're like going, what they moved to was like, wow, do it on the app. You're like going, I'm rushing through an airport, dragging a bag, maybe accompanied by a couple of kids or whatever, and you want me to be on an app doing a live chat. You're like going, no, I want to call you and make sure I can get to where I need to get to. So there's contextual stuff we need to understand. What happens when things get urgent or complicated or complex? And we need to think about design our experiences so that they're the right fit for the customer and the customer's kind of needs, and the right fit for your brand and your proposition and your business model and all these different sort of things. And the basic point of what I'm saying is like going, many people are doing just the same thing. It's a channel proliferation with no real increased investment to service those kind of channels, and you wonder why customers' perceptions of the experience that they're getting are kind of slipping. And it's because it's not delivering the outcomes that customers want. And I'm thinking there's a reality that if 90% of all contact center expense is to do with headcount, and you want to make sure that you can control the kind of headcount, and control the economics of that, why don't you just figure out where to focus those people, those resources in the right way to produce the drives the best outcomes? It's just like changing your kind of thinking about it a little bit. Don't do the same as everybody else if it's not working.
100%. I've seen a number of conversations whereby the advent of AI, it's going to mean that we can reduce down our head count. And the principle of the thing is actually, no, it's going to empower those people to do more with the time that they spend working for the company. And that increases the profitability and throughput within the company because they're not doing the mundanities of day-to-day life. There's a challenge that I'm going to come back with on this one, and it comes back to what you said earlier on. You said, be careful you're not going too far in relation to Alaska Airlines. What about buy-in? So especially in a risk-averse industry where ROI is key, profitability, margins can be tight, and where best practice is quote-unquote there for a reason, other people who have made this mistake, are you going up against that mindset of we're standing on the shoulders of giants here? And how do you navigate that in a way that you take people on the journey and get that buy-in?
The first thing I would say is like going, I understand the importance of getting buy-in and taking people on a journey. But what I would also challenge is the idea that following best practice is the way to outperform your industry. As far as I'm concerned, best practice is going like, you know what, there's best practice. It's a fast track to mediocrity.
That is a very elegant and very sharp answer that kind of puts a sword right through the guts of my question. Thank you. I really like that response. Yeah.
Because the thing, if you think about it, it's like going, best practice, what is it? It's benchmarking against like the mass of it. You're like going, if you want to be different, you've got to be willing to zig when other people are zagging, or vice versa. You can think about best practice. You go, that might inform you about what the industry is doing in the general direction of travel. But actually your thinking should be, I got to leap way beyond that.
Is there a paradox there though? And what I mean by that is that maybe this is unfair, and I'm sure you'll correct me if I go astray here, but where I'm thinking is the companies who are in most dire, urgent need of taking on that punk CX mindset will inevitably be the companies who are in the most significant distress in that area. Does that not make them even more risk averse? And does it take an even greater leap of faith to go, we're not in a good place right now, we have to do something radical, when actually the instinct is to shore up the foundations and go, no, let's just get everything our processes say we should do. Is that risk? Like, how do you broach that fight?
I think you're absolutely right. And my job is to challenge and encourage people to try and think differently and to question things. But I'm not going to be dogmatic about it, say, oh, you have to do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to say, look, this can be a slow burn, but it can be the first thing you might be, let me ask yourself a question. You go, oh, we've got a number of channels that we work over. You go, okay, if you were to kill one channel, and not the channel that you think is like the most expensive one, if you were to kill one channel that you think that might not work, or doesn't work as well as we would like, or we're committing more resources, or we could do with actually shutting that down and redeploying some people kind of here, then do that. Start small, take a step. But maybe you don't actually have to do it yourself. Maybe you can turn around and go, we talk about this artificial intelligence and supercomputers and machine learning and all these different sort of things. I think that we don't do as well, and this might be another sort of punk way of thinking about it, is to actually expect ourselves to come up with all the answers. Because what we end up doing is we're taking decisions about other people's work. And what we don't do is we don't spend, I think, enough time tapping into the collective intelligence of the biological supercomputers that populate the teams that work for us. All the agents, all the reps, all the team leaders, all the analysts, all these different sort of people that are working and dealing with all these kind of things. So let me tell you a story. There's a story from a book called Ricardo Semler. It's called Maverick. And this is about a company in Brazil in, I think it was the 1980s. And Ricardo's a bit of a hippie. And he took over his father's business. Didn't really want to do it, but he did it anyway. And the company started facing tough times. And he was a bit like, whoa. And everybody was telling him the formal advice he was getting is like, oh, we have to cut costs. We have to make redundancies. And he was a bit like, no, man, I'm not comfortable with them making redundancies. And they were like, but we don't have any other options. If we don't cut costs, then we're going to lose, potentially go bust. And he said, oh, I'm still not comfortable about chopping people. How do I decide who to chop and who not to chop? And he was like, oh, I feel conflicted by it. And so what he ended up doing is he went to the workforce and he explained the situation. You go, here's the problem. I don't know what to do. I don't know who to chop and everything else. I'd like you to help me with that. What would you do? And the workers got together and they figured it out. They said, actually, let's not chop anybody. Let's all reduce our hours to the kind of the point that we achieve the cost savings in a near term. We protect the skills and the livelihoods of kind of people. People will be able to operate on a smaller salary for a shorter period of time in the belief that we will be able to weather this storm, retain the talent, and then ride out the other kind of like side. Brilliant. He was like, 100%, let's do that, did that. That company went on, smashed it.
That's brilliant. I like that. And I think it's also nice to hear a story whereby that decision hasn't been made arbitrarily and it has been put forward as here's a challenge that we all want to overcome. Help me overcome it. And that collaborative thing.
And let me give you another example. Or a question. Chatbot experiences. There was a big rush to chatbots during the pandemic in 2020. Everybody's like, chatbots, we need to have a chatbot. So the deflection, self-service, all this sort of stuff. Most of the chatbots that got deployed were garbage, right? Everybody thought it was like a plug and play sort of thing. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Who are the customer conversation experts in any business? How many of those agents do you think were involved with designing those chatbots?
I can only speak to personal experience. I can't speak to every business, but 100% it's not the frontline staff.
Is it any surprise that most of those chatbots were garbage?
No, in the context of that, no, absolutely not.
And I think that's the kind of thing we need to understand, that we have some people that have incredible skills and insights and capability, but yet it's ourselves that stops us kind of tapping into that and what we think about other people and how we want to operate in these leadership, supervision, executive kind of positions.
Okay. So I'm going to close with a very vague question and I'll back it up a little bit. The example you've just given is a fantastic example, and the story before that, a fantastic example of it being done really effectively to an incredible outcome. What you've just described, whereby you implement chatbots and you do that across an industry and not one person actually engages with the frontline staff who are on the cold face dealing with customers day in and day out. One more question. Why do you think that isn't something that is a fundamental tenet of making any of these big impactful changes? What is it that stops businesses actually realizing and going, holy cow, yeah, no, let's talk to our staff. Let's find out from them. Let's engage them in this. Let's get them doing this.
Biggest barrier to that is ourselves. And what we tell ourselves about our role when we get promoted into team leadership or supervision or executive or senior management positions. We think we get promoted and then we think, actually, by dint of that promotion, we need to have all the answers. No? Yeah. But actually, we are there to serve others. Our job is to enable them to perform in the best way possible. Our job is there to make their lives easier. We don't actually have to come up with the answers. We have to respect the idea that people have value, have worth, have intellect, have insight, and that's worth tapping into. It is worth our time.
I swear, I promise all of the listeners, this hasn't been teed up at all. We didn't plan this out, but it's amazing that we've come full circle from where we started in our conversation, Adrian, to where we are now. In as much as we started talking about progressive rock versus punk. And one of the key differentiators between those two, in my opinion, when it comes to music, and again, you may disagree, is ego. When prog rock was all about the ego, it was all about that. And the punk aspect was very almost the antithesis of that. And it's interesting, we've come full circle and said, why don't companies do more of this? And it feeds into that punk principle of take the ego out of it, because that's what holds people back from being able to really get the best out of it. I just thought that was a fantastic summarization that you just provided, and it circled that very nicely.
Thank you. Can I actually say to people before we kind of end, and if you're a leader or supervisor or whatever your position you have in your business, if you look after people, realize that, and if this chimes with you and you think this is something that the way that I like to operate, but I find it challenging because it's not the way that we do, or if you're like going, oh, this sounds really interesting and I wish I could find people to align with that can help me understand how they're doing it with their organization, realize you're not alone. And your job is to actually go and find those kind of people. And so there's a poster over my right shoulder. I'm going to point into it here. And it says, the story behind the poster, it's featured in the Punk XL book. And it says, disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. And it's a quote from Woody Guthrie about the role of folk music in protest. So what he's trying to do is that you were trying to disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. What your role is to go and find those people that are quote unquote disturbed in your organization, that are going to be doing slightly different sort of things. Be those mavericks, be those people that are on the quiet, experimenting, doing things differently. And that may be you, but go and find other people that are doing some similar things and buddy up and see what you can learn from each other, or just go and observe what they're doing, because that's where you build connections and support and learning and all these different sort of things, because it's probably already happening. You just have to find it.
Amazing. What a fantastic, optimistic note to conclude our conversation on. Again, I can't thank you enough for our conversation today. Yet again, it's been a fantastic chat. I've really enjoyed talking to you today, Adrian, and hopefully the listeners who have joined us again will take in similar from the conversation. I look forward to seeing what you do next and what you've got coming down the line. So again, thank you so much for joining us on Talk Time, and I do look forward to seeing where you're going.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Talk Time with MaxContact. We hope today's discussion has sparked new ideas to help you advance in your contact center. To learn more about any of the topics discussed in this episode, visit www.maxcontact.com. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to leave us a rating on your favorite streaming platform to help other like-minded individuals join the conversation. Also, stay tuned for our upcoming listener questions segment. We'd love for you to participate and share your thoughts. And remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a future episode. On behalf of everyone at MaxContact, thanks for listening.